My whole life, I was treated unfairly because of my parents' favorite, the so-called golden child sister. But on my wedding day, I finally got the revenge I'd been waiting for. I spent most of my life being overlooked and treated unfairly because my sister was the so-called golden child. But on my wedding day, I finally got the justice I'd been waiting for. All my life, I'd felt like an outsider in my own family, thanks to my sister being the favorite, and as if that wasn't enough, she even tried to steal the spotlight by walking down the aisle at my own wedding. That was the final straw, and I finally got my payback. My parents always had a clear favorite, and it wasn't subtle. They doted on her while I was left in the background. If she pointed her finger at me for something, they'd take her word as gospel and punish me without question. But when I had proof she did something wrong, they'd downplay it, give her a slap on the wrist, and somehow still find a way to blame me too. Every year, my birthday cake was made in her favorite flavor, even though I couldn't stand it, and my parents acted clueless, like they had no idea I didn't like it. She always got more gifts, more attention, and even when an event was supposed to be for me, the plans ended up being all about what she wanted. Growing up, she was spoiled rotten and treated me like I was nothing more than a stress ball she could take her frustrations out on. At first, she barely acknowledged me, but things really took a turn for the worse once we hit our teenage years. She ended up completely friendless, and her behavior started spiraling. Did her friends leave because she was nasty to them? I couldn't say. We never had much of a relationship. My parents always bragged about her accomplishments, never mentioning anything negative, while they constantly made jokes about my flaws as if they were entertainment. I only figured out she didn't have any friends because we went to the same school, and I noticed she was always alone. On the flip side, I actually got along pretty well with most people. And when my sister realized that I had a social life and she didn't, I suddenly went from being her occasional target to her full-time enemy. She started making up stories about me and my friends, accusing us of things we didn't do. My parents, of course, sided with her every time. They started grounding me, telling me things like, "Your sister says those kids aren't a good influence." Or guilt-tripping me with, "Why do you want to leave us? Can't you just be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from feeling completely alone was my extended family. A lot of them lived nearby, and I got along great with my cousins even though we were different ages. One time at a family event, they invited me to go somewhere with them. I can't even remember where exactly, but I remember feeling sad as I told them I wasn't allowed to go. When they asked why, I blurted out the truth, that I wasn't allowed to have friends because my sister didn't have any. Word got around to the adults, and apparently, they ripped into my parents about it. Naturally, I got grounded for a month and scolded for lying. But after that, my parents backed off a bit, so honestly it felt worth it. After that family embarrassment, my sister transferred to a different school. I guess it was too much for her to handle, knowing that everyone in the family now knew she didn't have any friends, so she begged to switch schools, and my parents didn't hesitate. Even though it cost them more money and the commute was longer, they gave in to her demands. At the new school, she did manage to make some friends. But she never went back to ignoring me. Instead, she doubled down. It was like she got a taste of power by messing with me and didn't want to give that up. Plus, she still hadn't forgiven me for spilling the truth to the family. So my life kept being a nightmare. She'd bring her new friends home, and they'd gang up on me, but my parents just laughed and called it harmless teasing. I never invited my own friends over, either because my parents were rude hosts or because I knew my sister would accuse them of something like stealing, and of course, my parents would believe her without question. The only people I could actually be myself around were my cousins. My parents never dared to treat them the way they treated me. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't even want him to come to the house, but my parents insisted on meeting him. At one point during that visit, we got separated, and he found me looking upset. He told me that my sister had come up to him in skimpy clothes, batting her eyes and talking trash about me while bragging about how great she was. He was so uncomfortable that he came straight to find me and tell me what happened. But my sister spun a different story for our parents. She claimed my boyfriend came onto her, and she turned him down because she'd never do that to me. And you can guess who my parents believed. Now, I won't pretend that boyfriend was perfect, but I believed him right away, and not for the most noble reason. You've got to understand, I was a bitter, angry teenager who'd spent years being treated like garbage by my own family. I couldn't stand my sister, and she couldn't stand me. That said, let's talk about appearances for a second. I hadn't brought them up before because they didn't really matter at first. Both of my parents were on the heavier side and had this habit of showing affection by overfeeding us. More snacks, more treats, that kind of thing. My sister followed in their footsteps and ended up overweight too, but I stayed skinny. I didn't get treats like she did. Half the time I was being punished, which meant no snacks for me. Of course, looks don't define a person, it's who you are on the inside that counts. But let's be honest, even back then, my sister was a spoiled brat with a nasty attitude. She wasn't exactly smooth when it came to flirting either. She never had to work for anything, so she had no idea how to actually try. She'd just demand things, and my parents would jump to meet her every need. And to be honest, even in my self-conscious teenage years, I couldn't picture my boyfriend being tempted by someone like her. My parents ended up forbidding me from seeing that awful boy ever again. I tried to keep the relationship going behind their backs, but it was too difficult. Eventually, it just fell apart. Later, I started dating someone else, but once again, my sister pulled the same stunt, hit on him, got rejected, then claimed he tried to seduce her. And like clockwork, my parents bought her story. When I pointed out that this was happening again, they told me I clearly had bad judgment and couldn't pick decent guys. It turned into a full-blown Romeo and Juliet mess, and that relationship ended too. Eventually, I got a reputation at school. I was called a slut because I was okay with making out with boys but never got into real relationships. Luckily, that never reached my parents or sister. The only boyfriend my sister ever brought home during that time was treated like royalty. My parents praised him nonstop, constantly rubbing it in my face, asking why I couldn't find someone respectable like him. But then he disappeared, and suddenly he was a lying jerk who took advantage of our daughter. Just like that, they rewrote the story, and the double standards continued. She always had more allowance, better curfews, and more freedom. She could go wherever she wanted, whenever she pleased, but I was always stuck. And when I pointed it out, they'd say it was because she was older. But once I reached the same age, nothing changed. And when I brought that up, they either denied ever saying it or claimed I wasn't trustworthy like she was, using those fake accusations about my boyfriends and friends as proof. Time moved on, and before I knew it, my sister was getting ready to graduate. She got accepted into a college, nothing impressive, and she didn't earn any scholarships or honors to get there. Since my parents only ever shared her successes with me, I had no idea what other colleges she applied to or how many rejections she might have racked up. What I did know was that her grades weren't great, because anytime she managed a B, it was treated like a big win. I usually brought home solid grades, but my parents acted like it was no big deal. Their excuse was always, "Well, you always get good grades, so it's not really worth celebrating." Of course, they made a huge deal about her going to college and told her they'd cover every single cost. Honestly, I just felt relieved she'd be out of the house. But that relief didn't last long. She still came back nearly every other weekend, and somehow every visit included missing stuff from my room or some new drama she stirred up just to make my life harder. My curfews were still strict as ever, and nothing really changed for me. Eventually, my mom sat me down to talk about my own upcoming graduation. I was only a year behind my sister. She explained that since they were already paying for my sister's education, they didn't have money left for mine. Her solution? I should just go straight to work after graduating high school and wait until my sister was done with college. Then, maybe, they'd see if they could help me. Oh, and if I planned to keep living at home, I'd be expected to pay for everything, my own stuff, a share of the bills, and even rent. I mentioned student loans as an option. My mom quickly backtracked, saying, "Well, yes, technically you could, but we care about you so much, and since your judgment is poor, we'll be the ones to decide if any college is worth you going into debt for." I had no clue how they thought they could stop me from getting loans, but I didn't press the issue. They never even brought up the idea of scholarships, probably because they had no clue what kind of grades I'd been getting anymore, and honestly, they never believed in me to begin with. I didn't even flinch when she told me all this. I just said, "Okay." That clearly threw her off, because she kept poking and prodding like she expected some kind of emotional reaction. Maybe she was hoping I'd freak out so they'd have a reason to officially deny me any support, but I stayed calm. I told her I understood, thanked her for her honesty, and left it at that. Later, my dad tried to have the same talk, but I stayed just as collected. You see, after a lifetime of dealing with their terrible parenting, I never once expected them to pay for my college. I always knew they'd find some excuse not to help me and continue making my life difficult. That whole maybe later thing? I didn't buy it for a second. But I'd been getting ready for college on my own for a while. Since I rarely got to go anywhere and had few close friends, I used that time to focus on studying. For me, college was more than just school, it was my shot at finally being free. And when the time came, I gave it everything I had. I busted my butt and landed a full scholarship, not to some fancy Ivy League place or into a high-profile program like law or medicine, but to a solid college with a good course and no tuition bill. I knew my sister would lose her mind over this and try to use my parents to stop me, so I got ahead of it. I posted the news on social media at the same time I told my parents, even throwing in a fake thank you to them in the caption just to make sure they couldn't easily object without looking bad. That move pretty much forced their hand. They'd have to explain to the rest of the family if they tried to stop me. At first, they acted kind of proud and even bragged a little. But I think my sister got in their ears, because they quickly switched tones and asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They even let it slip that my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, they warned that I'd probably fail harder. I stood my ground. They didn't like it, but they couldn't stop me. College ended up being my escape, my safe haven. I started feeling genuinely happy for the first time in years. I still kept in touch with my parents and visited during holidays, but since they didn't contribute a dime to my life, I used finances as an excuse to skip visits often. During this time, I made it a point not to introduce any guy I dated to them. Somewhere in all this, my sister dropped out of college. I know she didn't graduate. If she had, my parents would have put up balloons and bragged to the whole planet. She moved back in with my parents, and didn't pay a cent in rent or bills. Of course, my parents said that was different. She ended up getting a job at the same place my mom worked, obviously because my mom pulled some strings to get her in. They told me all this like it was something to be proud of. Anyway, I was close to wrapping up school when I met the man who'd become my husband. You know how some people always say, "If that had happened to me, I'd have said something." Well, my husband is the guy who actually does something. Me? I've always been more timid, the type who stays quiet in the moment, and later lies awake wishing I'd said or done something brave. I'm the kind of person who cries when I'm mad because I can't get the words out. But my husband, he doesn't hold back. He thrives on confrontation and loves standing up for himself and others. If someone crosses him and he doesn't react right away, that's when you need to worry. It means he's planning something worse. He wanted me to post this story, actually, said we should have shared it on a nuclear revenge board, but he figured what we did wasn't quite that intense. People were surprised I ended up with someone like him, but honestly, just because I couldn't act like him doesn't mean I didn't admire it. I love that he does what I never could, and he's always fair. He treats people well, but he doesn't tolerate being disrespected. When we talked about getting married, we agreed that we didn't care much for an elaborate ceremony. We'd rather save that money for an unforgettable honeymoon in Europe. As for the location, since his family was scattered across the country, and mine mostly lived in our hometown, we figured it made sense to hold the wedding there. We didn't live too far, so we could travel on weekends to take care of arrangements. We even had flexible schedules that allowed us to spend a bit of time in town if needed. We sent out engagement announcements and save the date cards a few months ahead. That's when my parents, unsurprisingly, demanded to meet the man I was marrying. I wanted to finally stand up to them and say no, but I struggled. The distance between us had softened me a little, and I started wondering if maybe they weren't that bad anymore. But when I told my husband I'd allow the meeting but make sure they were never alone with him, he looked at me like I'd just canceled Christmas. He'd been gearing up for this moment. He even bought a discreet, high-quality recorder to keep in his pocket during the visit, just in case anything went down. My husband was practically buzzing with excitement, thinking about how he'd finally get the chance to shut my sister down, roast her, and record the whole thing to show the rest of my family. So off he went, all fired up to meet them, by himself, I should add, and came back later on, absolutely thrilled. "Babe, you're not gonna believe the insane stuff they said. We can absolutely wreck them with this," he told me, practically bouncing with energy. He said there were endless ways we could get back at them. I was puzzled and immediately asked to hear the recording, but he told me to let him explain first, otherwise, I might take it the wrong way. So, here's what went down. He got there, and instead of my sister trying to flirt with him, my parents and sister sat him down for a little talk. After grumbling about how they didn't like him, how my judgment was poor, and all that usual noise, they dropped their big offer. They said they'd cover the wedding expenses, but only on one condition. They wanted my sister to walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress. My parents insisted it was only right that the older sister go down the aisle before the younger one, even if it wasn't her wedding. They said it would give her the experience of getting married, complete with a gown, a photo shoot at my venue, and even a separate cake afterward. At this point, my husband wants to jump in. So, here's my husband's part. "Hey, husband here. Look, hell hath no fury like a Reddit revenge lurker whose wife just got stomped on again by her family." Even though my wife calls me quick with comebacks, I'll admit, my brain glitched for a second when they said all that with completely straight faces. I mean, even the people of Troy probably wouldn't accept that horse a second time. But once my mental system rebooted, I had a full arsenal of insults lined up, then something inside me, like a little devil on my shoulder, whispered, "Play along." So I told them I'd need to think it over, see how my fiancé, now wife, might feel, and ran out before my face gave away what I was really plotting. Back to me now. So my husband came back and told me, grinning ear to ear, about how my parents wanted my wedding to revolve around my sister, again. I was stunned. The time and space apart from them had made me forget just how low they could stoop. I honestly thought even they wouldn't cross that line. Luckily, my husband being so fired up for revenge kept me grounded and out of that dark headspace. We had a blast tossing around wild ideas, some ridiculous, some doable. Eventually, we called his much more sensible brother to help us figure things out. We pitched him a plan that involved giving them a fake venue address, among other tricks. His brother gave us a firm reality check. He said he understood we weren't going to just let this go, and wouldn't try to stop us, but warned that some of our ideas might land us in legal hot water. So we toned it down. We settled on a more practical, but still delicious, plan: pretend we were on board with the whole thing, then hire security to block her from entering the venue. But that was just the beginning. It wouldn't be worthy of pro-revenge if we stopped there. Most of the genius behind the full plan came from my husband, but we came up with it together, and he insisted I be the one to tell it. So here it goes. First, he went back to my family and pretended to be on their side. He told them he didn't think I'd go for the idea, but he didn't see a problem with it. He played the concerned future son-in-law card, saying he didn't want the family to fall apart over this. He also hinted that I didn't like confrontation and might not make a scene if it was sprung on me last minute in front of everyone. But, he added, marriage is a big deal, so there was no telling how I might react. Then he proposed a compromise. They helped cover the wedding expenses. That way, I'd be less likely to flip out, since I'd be under pressure to stay polite and grateful. He told me later their jaws dropped, and my adult sister actually skipped around the room with joy like a toddler. They agreed to everything. And then my husband added another brilliant twist. He told them that because I'd had bad judgment in past relationships, a story they had pushed for years, I was controlling and suspicious, always needing to check his phone and monitor what he did. So, to keep me calm and compliant, nothing about the plan could be written down. Any talk about my sister walking down the aisle first had to be done in person, face to face, at their house. And just like that, we kicked off a months-long con where my parents and sister thought they were fooling me, while we were the ones playing them. They didn't offer to pay for the entire wedding, but they did start forking over money here and there. Of course, my parents wanted to control every detail, including things that mattered a lot to me, like the music and color scheme. My husband would talk them down, pretending he was keeping me in check. But we didn't really care about most of those details anyway, so we let them feel in control. Here's how we milked them. We'd go to the venue and test drinks and food, always choosing the second cheapest, or even the cheapest options. Then, my husband would secretly take my sister there to sample the exact same stuff. Afterward, he'd sigh and say something like, "It's too bad we can't go with the premium options. We just don't want to take advantage of your parents' generosity." Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best their food and drinks. Then my parents would call me and insist they wanted to cover the upgraded package. We pulled the same stunt with the flowers and photographer. My husband gave my sister a bouquet of the flowers we actually wanted and said sadly, "My fiancé is set on these ugly ones instead, though." Naturally, my parents rushed to fix it by offering to pay for the more expensive flowers, the ones we picked from the start. The only bump we hit was with the wedding dress. My parents had picked out a gown they thought I should wear, not hideous exactly, but it wasn't flattering or my style. The original plan was to nod and smile, say we'd use it, and then just wear a different one, but then my mom texted me about it. Now there was written proof I'd agreed, and that was a risk we couldn't take. So I had to stand my ground and flat out refuse, no texts, no written replies. My husband went over to talk it out. That's when my sister suggested they sabotage the dress I actually wanted so I'd have no choice but to wear the other one. He played along, pretending it was a good backup plan. And through all of this, they kept everything verbal, no texts, no emails. We made sure of that by having me reply anytime my sister tried to message my husband directly. This helped reinforce the story that I was jealous and controlling, just like my husband told them. So they bought the whole act and never left behind any written evidence. Some folks might cringe at the idea of their partner going behind their back, talking trash about them to their own family, but for me, I found it hilarious. I'm such a pushover that being painted as this possessive, borderline psycho fiancé actually cracked me up, and I cheered my husband on the whole way. Guess my sense of humor's a little twisted. Oh, and yeah, my sister did try to flirt with him. He pretended to be torn about it just to sell the illusion that he was on their side. He'd fake like he was sneaking around behind my back, but he never let them know about the real ace up our sleeve, the hired security. Honestly, the whole thing turned into a comedy show for us. My husband and I had originally considered just hitting the courthouse to save money for our honeymoon, but instead, we ended up with a lavish, over-the-top wedding, and barely spent a cent of our own cash. We joked it was emotional compensation for all the garbage my parents had put me through over the years. Honestly, I think he enjoyed the long con way more than the actual wedding planning. I never thought I'd see a man beam with joy at the idea of wasting his Saturday on a road trip just to discuss table linens with his future in-laws, but here we are. Then, the big day rolled around. The plan my parents, sister, and supposedly my husband had agreed on was simple. Once all the guests were seated, since the bride is traditionally the last to appear, my sister would swoop in right then, walk the aisle in a wedding dress, and steal the spotlight before I even stepped out. The idea was that by the time I realized what had happened, it would be too late to stop it. As for the whole dress sabotage thing, we got crafty. We saved some leftover fabric from the alterations on my actual dress. My husband brought that scrap to my parents' house, where my sister still lived, and claimed he'd ruined the gown. Then he said he had to rush back to calm me down because I was supposedly fuming. He told them he'd meet them at the venue, and we left it at that. When the day came, we made sure our hired security guy wasn't obvious at first. As the guests and my family arrived, they were only greeted by a friendly woman with a name checklist. Nothing out of the ordinary. Once my parents were settled inside, that's when we rolled out the real deal, a serious-looking guy who might as well have had bodyguard tattooed on his forehead. We explained he wasn't to let my sister through the doors, no matter what, and offered him a hefty tip if he kept it all quiet. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. My parents got a text that my sister was just a few minutes away. Right on cue, my dad gave the signal to kick things off. The bridesmaids were prepped to follow his lead, so they lined up and took their places without checking with me. He stood near the entrance, expecting me to appear later, after the surprise entrance from my sister. Meanwhile, a friend, one not in the bridal party, sent me a quick message telling me it was go time. We had chosen her specifically so no one would get suspicious if she sent me a heads up. She was just as hyped about the chaos as my husband. As soon as my dad got into position, the music started. The doors opened, and there I was. He looked stunned to see me walking in. He kept trying to peer past me to spot my sister, but from his position, he couldn't see the main entrance. Then his phone rang. I caught a glimpse of the caller ID. It was my sister. He mumbled something like, "Something came up," and walked away, leaving me standing there alone. You could hear the gasps ripple through the room. My friend jumped into action, asking loudly, "What happened?" I fought back tears, not entirely acting, and choked out. "He said it wasn't supposed to be me here." That line had been agreed on beforehand. If my dad bailed, we'd use it to make him look like the villain. And honestly, it didn't take much acting. I was hurt. The friend raised her voice again. "What do you mean it wasn't supposed to be you?" Loud enough for everyone to hear and start whispering. Then she declared she was going to find out what was going on, and took off running. That was part of the plan. Her leaving the room would buy us time, stir up drama, and make sure my dad couldn't come back in and try to stop the ceremony. Eventually, my mom left too. At that point, my husband's dad swooped in. We'd warned him ahead of time that he might need to jump in, just in case. He made a dramatic run down the aisle, took my arm, and we continued as planned. People were whispering, confused, and even stepped out to find out what was happening. By the time I reached my husband at the altar, everything felt right again. He gently told me my sad face was Oscar-worthy and promised he'd handle my parents after the ceremony. We got married without a single interruption after that. My parents never came back. I noticed a lot of people stepping out during the reception and returning later, but no one wanted to tell me what was going on. At one point, someone leaned over and whispered something to my husband. Whatever it was, he left immediately. When he returned, he had a thunderstorm on his face but leaned in and told me he needed to disappear for a second before he burst out laughing. He was trying so hard to stay in character. Later, I got the full rundown from our friends, family, the security guy, and my husband. Turns out, my sister showed up, in full bridal getup. Security stuck to the script and blocked her. He told her she must have had the wrong location because there was already a bride inside. And yes, we tipped him very well afterward. My dad tried to intimidate him, claimed he'd never seen him before and demanded to know who he was working for. The guard calmly said he was hired by the couple, and if needed, he'd call the police to explain his presence. Realizing they were running out of time, my dad begged to have her let in. That's when our friend swooped in, yelling and throwing shade at my sister, asking what the heck she thought she was doing, all just a distraction. Soon, my mom arrived too, along with a bunch of other guests. By then, the plan was officially toast. All my parents could do was try to contain the fallout. Everyone who caught wind of what happened was disgusted by what they tried to pull. The three of them, my parents and sister, quickly blamed my husband, saying it had been no secret and he was in on it the whole time. So they called him over. And boy did he shine. He threw on his best confused face and played dumb like a champ. To quote him later, "Gaslight. Gatekeep. Girl boss." He denied everything and made them look unhinged. They demanded he admit what he'd agreed to. He asked for proof. All they could pull up were texts about basic wedding planning stuff. Meanwhile, my sister was full-on meltdown mode, sitting on the floor, sobbing and kicking like a toddler. My dad looked ready to punch my husband, but the guard, along with some guests, stepped in. Of course, they claimed they had no evidence because he told them never to text anything about the plan. My husband just laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then he turned serious and asked them flat out why on earth he would ever agree to something so twisted. He laid into them hard, called them out for being lousy parents, and made it crystal clear he wasn't about to let their lies and lunacy wreck his wedding. After that, he came back to me. Nobody believed their side. The venue had security cameras, but I couldn't get access to the footage. They said it was only for security purposes. Thankfully, a few guests caught parts of the whole scene on their phones. Watching my parents and sister get shredded by the crowd out front, after all those years of me being accused and dismissed, was hands down the best wedding gift I could have asked for. My mom was in tears, my dad was flipping shades between ghost white and fire red, and my sister was still sprawled out on the ground, wailing. They kept insisting that my husband had been in on the whole thing, but people started asking questions they couldn't answer. Why would he agree to it? Why wasn't there any proof? And why on earth were they pushing for my sister to hijack my wedding? They couldn't come up with anything that made sense. Eventually, they were asked to leave the venue, and they didn't really have a choice. My dad actually had to drag my sister up off the floor because she flat out refused to move. Nobody said a word to me about any of this the rest of the night. Maybe they wanted to protect me, Or maybe it was just one of those rare times people showed the bride a little grace. Either way, everyone seemed extra nice and upbeat. My husband swears the fancy food and open bar didn't hurt, lol. We had an amazing time. My husband kept up the angry act for a little while but eventually cracked and spent the rest of the night grinning like a kid in a candy store. Afterward, we headed to the hotel to catch a few hours of sleep before taking off for our honeymoon. Oh, and speaking of that, my parents had offered to pay for our plane tickets, but we didn't trust that for a second. We figured they might try to cancel them out of spite, so we turned that down fast. Since the wedding, the three of them, my parents and sister, have tried to reach out. I haven't answered any of their calls. My husband insisted we keep a paper trail of everything, which turned out to be a brilliant move because eventually, my sister messaged me. I won't even bother repeating what she said. It was totally unhinged and all over the place, but the gist was that she blamed me for her public humiliation. She called my husband a two-faced snake who played them like fools for months, and honestly, he's proud of that one and wants to frame it for our living room. She also said she just knew I'd end up being cheated on, with her, no less. Total delusion. That was the last straw. My husband grabbed my phone, took screenshots of the call logs, her crazy messages, and the texts from my parents demanding I answer them. He sent everything to the big family group chat. He also shared the messages they'd sent directly to him, full of insults, threats, all of it, and continued his. What are you talking about? I never agreed to anything. Routine. He even threw in a warning that if they kept it up, he'd consider suing for defamation and harassment. Then he posted a heartfelt message in the chat, basically begging the rest of the family to help. He said I was being harassed nonstop, first on my wedding day and now during our honeymoon, and pleaded with them to step in and get my parents and sister to back off. He finished it off with a request that nobody share our location, just in case my sister tried to show up and pull some ridiculous stunt like claiming he had agreed to play along and sleep with her on our honeymoon. Yes, really? Our family members responded fast. They promised they'd take care of it, and ever since then, we've had peace. Though my husband's a little bummed my sister didn't try anything else so he could roast her again and get one more round of satisfaction. Who knows if this peace will last, but for now, it's quiet. And honestly, while I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding like most people hope for, I can at least say that, for once, they didn't ruin something important to me. Actually, I got to turn the tables on them. Now for something folks always asked me, do I know why they treated me like this? It's a fair question, and I've asked myself the same thing my whole life. I tried asking them when I was younger, but they denied everything and told me I was being selfish and spoiled. Eventually, I gave up trying to get an answer. Over the years I've come up with a few theories, and while I can't be sure, this one makes the most sense to me. I think I was an accident. It took them a long time to have my sister, so she was their miracle baby, wanted, planned for, cherished. Then, not long after, I came along. Our age gap is small, which makes me think they didn't expect to have another kid so soon. Maybe they weren't careful enough or didn't even realize my mom was pregnant until it was too late to change anything. They weren't exactly rolling in money either, and a second baby probably felt like an unexpected burden. If that's the case, I think they resented me for existing. But again, that's just my theory. In the end, the reason doesn't matter. Whatever their excuse was, it doesn't justify how they treated me. And did they really believe that ridiculous wedding stunt was going to work? My husband and I have a theory. We think my sister lost her mind when she found out I was getting married before her, considering she rarely even got asked out, let alone had a steady relationship. She probably threw a fit, and my parents, trying to pacify her, pitched that insane idea to my husband. They didn't think he'd agree. In fact, we're pretty sure the whole thing was a trap. They wanted to be able to say they offered to pay for the wedding, but since we turned them down, it wasn't their fault. It would make them look generous to my sister while giving them an excuse not to give me a dime. But then my husband surprised them by saying yes. And from there they were stuck. If they backed out, my sister would have gone nuclear on them. So they followed through, thinking they could still control things. Well, they thought wrong. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this wild ride and haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got plenty more jaw-dropping real-life stories coming your way.